Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, LesleySullivan, and today is episode 150, and we're going to take a look at part 2 of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners because as usual, you guys are awesome. I love to see you here. So a big shout out to Oklahoma, Kansas, New York, Texas, and California in terms of countries, the United States, and the Russian Federation. Okay, in terms of a little bit of housekeeping about things that are celebrated in the month of September, let's see here, on September 21st, some things that are celebrated or brought attention to is International Day of Peace. I think that's wonderful. And it's a World's Alzheimer's Day. I think it's good to bring attention to that because hopefully we can have a cure for that very soon. And then the 21st of September is also World Gratitude Day. I think it's good to be grateful. It's just, I'm not always a fan of that word, and here's why. I've noticed that sometimes in societies that when they lack empathy for people, like they may have sympathy, but if you don't have empathy, then you're missing really what it means to be a good person. Because one thing I've noticed is like whenever I've had a hard situation in my life, I can always tell who really doesn't care because sometimes they'll be like, well, if you were just more grateful, you know, your situation wouldn't seem so bad. And I just am shocked at the attitude that sometimes people give others when they're suffering. So I don't know if that's because of our society not really being focused on being good and true, or if it's just a random trend that's taking place because when someone cares, they care. But I always find it interesting whenever someone pulls the whole, well, if you were just more grateful, your life would be better. That's not always true, and I think that's a cop-out to kind of give people permission to not care about what happens to somebody else. So needless to say, I'm not friends with people that talk like that because that tells me they only care about themselves. Because whenever someone has said, oh, if you're just more grateful, they totally missed the point of the conversation. They did not have empathy, much less sympathy for what was happening to me, and they were not very kind or genuine. And whenever someone is not kind or genuine, you cannot trust them because it's all about them. Like those are very selfish people. So I've learned, you know, someone can act like they're there for you when the times are good, you know, kind of like when you're high rolling and things like that. But when things get tough, when they're not there for you, or when they make hateful statements like what I just mentioned, you really realize who are your friends and who are not your friends, and who really cares about you and who doesn't. So it's kind of an eye-opening experience, at least it was for me. But it's one of those things, when people pretend to be something else, it's not, I don't think it's your fault when you didn't see it. You know what I mean? Because whenever someone's being deceitful, that's on the person that's being deceitful. It's not the responsibility of the victim. It's not the fault of the person who they deceived. So just be aware of that. But anyway, moving on to something more positive. September 22nd was International Day of Radiant Peace. I think that's wonderful. It was also World Rhino Day. I think that's good because unfortunately, from what I understand, we've had problems, not necessarily in the United States, of course, but there have been issues with poaching of rhinos and their horns, and I think that's horrible to do that. Poaching is a horrible offense, and it's one of those things that when people are poaching, I don't think they're really taking into stock that they could literally obliterate a species from the face of the earth. So we need to be careful about those things. The next one is World Carefree Day. I think that's interesting. Then it is World Narcolepsy Day. I'm not really sure if I would want to celebrate that, but I think it's interesting to bring attention to it for sure. Then for September 23rd was International Day of Sign Languages. I think that's really awesome. There is a guy I went to school with back in high school. Either one of his parents or both of his parents were deaf, but he was not. But he learned sign language in order to communicate with them. And so it was really cool. It was like for show and tell or something like that. I can't remember if it was his mom. I'm trying to remember which parent it was that came in. It was so long ago. But they spoke sign language in front of us and they taught us different sign languages. So I thought that was really neat to do that. Let's see here, moving on to the next lovely day, because we're a little bit behind, and I do apologize for that, but sometimes life gets busy. Let's see, September 24th was Heritage Day for South Africa. I think that's good. I think they should definitely celebrate their heritage just like anybody else. I do want to mention, though, that South Africa is a very corrupt region, and it's very sad because if I remember correctly, South Africa is where they're having a problem with white farmers being murdered by African Americans that are trespassing onto their property, and they're wanting to get rid of white people. And it's really been bad, and it's been so horrible that the police cannot keep up with the crime in that area. So please be aware that South Africa is not the safest place. In fact, it's quite a violent place to live. I met a guy, I bet it was like 5 or 6 years ago. He had a really neat accent. I had never heard it before. And I asked him where he was from, and he said that he was from South Africa. And I said, oh, well, what are you doing in the United States? And he said, well, I came here so I wouldn't die. I was like, what? And, he's 42 years old. At least at that time, he's 42 years old. He's a white guy. And he said that men don't, the men in South Africa typically don't live past 45, regardless of whether they are white or black, because there's so much violence. And so he immigrated to the United States for safety reasons. So just FYI, be aware that South Africa is not this happy, peppy place that some people try to make it seem like it is. But just be aware of that. If you are visiting there, be sure to check out the United States. There's a .gov website. I can't remember if it's Homeland Security or what, but it's a website that lists all the different countries on the face of the earth, and it says whether or not it's a safe time to visit these different areas, and it lets you know what's going on. So just be aware of that website, and also update your passports and get your vaccines and things like that. Because South Africa, I don't know what diseases they have there, but Africa just in general tends to have really bad diseases over there, and they do not have very good health care. That's why Africa is predominantly a third world country, or a third world region or area, I would say. They do not have very good health care, and a lot of their governments are very corrupt. So whatever problems we're having in the United States, it's nothing compared to other areas of the world. The United States, we do have our problems and our issues, but ours are minuscule compared to others. There is no such thing as perfection on the face of this earth, so to speak, but it's one of those things that we need to count our blessings. And it's very important for the United States to still be that light on the hill, and to set the example and raise the bar high, and not lower the standard just because other people are having a hard time living up to it. It's one of those things that, when you promote democracy, freedom, and capitalism, a lot of that corruption will stop. It doesn't completely eliminate, because corruption is not necessarily about what government or what policies your government has per se, although some policies are way worse than others. It's really dependent upon the individuals, which is why it's very important who we elect into office and what is their skill set. What are their morals and values? What do they stand for? What do they tolerate? What do they not tolerate? Things of that nature. So just be aware of that in terms of corruption. And also on September 24th, it was Save the Koala Day. So that's awesome there, because we don't want species to become endangered. It was also International Rabbit Day on September 24th. That's cool. I think one of the neatest rabbits I have ever come across is the Flemish giant rabbit, and these rabbits are huge. They are so cute, such a wonderful pet. They are called gentle giants. They can get up to about 25 or 30 pounds. They make great pets for children that are learning how to be responsible for an animal, because these animals are very docile, they're very calm, and they're huge, and they're just the funniest rabbits there are. They're just very sweet, and you can train them to walk on a leash. They are harness trainable, so that's always good. September 25th was World Dream Day. I think that's awesome. Don't ever give up on your dreams. Never, never, never. Your dreams belong to you. It was also World Pharmacist Day. I think that's wonderful. We need more pharmacists. I think one of the bad things that occurred during COVID-19, besides the actual disease, was the fact that in some states, I don't know if it's in all 50 states because I am ignorant on this particular thing, but there was an emergency protocol that was signed into practice, at least here in Oklahoma, that pharmacy technicians could administer vaccines. And I think that's a mistake because pharmacy technicians, they are not pharmacists. They are not medical professionals. They have not been to pharmacy school. They have never been to medical school. They are not MDs or DOs. They're not even nurse practitioners. They're not even nurses. And that's not to insult them by any means. But it's just one of those things. If they don't have the education, they don't have the education. So one thing I've noticed is that whenever I go into my pharmacy to get a vaccine, I always request to see the pharmacist because I always have questions that I know a pharmacy technician, they don't have the knowledge to answer. And I've noticed that sometimes pharmacy technicians, they're very desperate sometimes to look like they know what they're talking about because they, I think they want to do a good job, but, you shouldn't pretend to know something that you don't. Just be honest and say, hey, I'm not aware of that. I don't have that knowledge. Let me have you speak to the pharmacist. Well, there have been some pharmacy technicians that have not always been very nice to me. They've given me attitude and rolled their eyes at me because I requested to see the pharmacist. And these are very scientific health questions. So these are not just your average questions. So I like to double check and make sure that what I'm getting is appropriate for me in terms of vaccines and medications and things like that. So it's one of those things that, you need to be picky about where you get your prescriptions filled and where you get your vaccines because if you're constantly having to deal with people, if you're constantly having to deal with people that don't really care to do the right thing and they have an attitude problem, then you need to go elsewhere to conduct your business. And I kind of figured that this was going to happen whenever they allowed pharmacy technicians to start administering vaccines because they don't understand disease, the way that a pharmacist does. And so I also think it's a mistake for pharmacy technicians to be picking up the phone at pharmacies because a lot of times they're trying to answer questions that only the pharmacist should answer, which I think is an issue. If it's just a simple question, sure, like, hey, can you update my address, my phone number, blah, blah, blah. Can you order this? That's cool. But when it comes to medical questions, I think it should definitely come down to the pharmacist. So just be aware of that for sure. Let's see here, moving on. It is, Rosh Hashanah began on September 25th. That's always beautiful. So there is that. Then we have also on the September 25th was World Rivers Day. I think that's very important, and here's why. There have been several podcasts or several episodes we have discussed the environment, especially in regards to the EPA and Superfund sites within the United States. It's one of those things that if you have contaminated water of any kind, that is a health risk not only to the environment but to people and animals. So we need to make sure that if water is contaminated, hey, if it can't be used for cattle and livestock, then it for sure cannot be utilized by people. Whether it's to drink it or to wash your dishes or things like that. Because, whenever we talk about the environment, one of the things that the liberal left will do is they'll make it seem like the environment is more important than people when that is not the case. We are the environment because we live in the environment. People are at the top of the food chain for a reason. So unfortunately, the environmentalist left, they like to make it seem like the environment is more important than people, and that is not true. People are actually more important than plants or animals because, see, here's the thing. If you take care of people, if you make sure that everything is safe for a person, then it will be safe for everything else that is living on the face of this earth. But the moment you devalue human life, that is a big issue. And the liberal left is very much doing that with their policies in regards to the EPA, environmentalism. I would say you're trying to get involved in this environmental stuff overseas in regards to, I think it's... what was it? There's some event or something or conference that either happened in the UK or in Paris, France, and I'm just like, we need to stop aligning ourselves with people that they just want our money. So we need to be careful about those things because, we're number one for a reason. And it's one of those things that we need to be aware when people are jealous of what we have. And one thing I've noticed is that whenever someone is jealous of me, first of all, they don't like me. Number two, they don't care about me. Number three, they don't love me. And number four, they want what I have. And they will do everything they can to make every situation negative and to put me down so that they will try to convince me that I don't deserve what I have. Well, that is exactly what is happening in regards to the liberal left aligning themselves with other countries, especially within the European Union, that are very much extreme environmentalism, which makes no sense because these are countries that are socialist. A lot of these countries that are socialist, they don't really care about the environment. They just come up with all these stupid policies so that they can legally raise taxes and raise them so high that people want to leave their country. So just be aware of that because it's not always a pleasant thing. So moving on, catching up to September 26th, it is International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. I'm not really sure if that's ever going to happen, especially with Russia and Iran and also North Korea. And I also think it would be a mistake for us to disarm ourselves because then we are sitting ducks for anybody and everybody. So I think that's wishful thinking because other people have weapons and have weaponized. Unfortunately, the United States, we are the policemen of the world. And so when you are the policeman of the world, you can't just throw your guns on the table in a saloon and expect all the bad people to do the same thing. Like that's just not how justice and laws work. That's not how societies work. That's not how your enemies work. So, like, you have to be aware of these things. It's kind of like how, I think it's in Chicago where they have some of the strictest gun laws, but yet they have the highest crime rate and they have the most gang violence. Well, they have restricted so many people from getting legal weapons that it's the criminals and the thugs that have weapons. They are illegal, but you're basically allowing the enemy to arm themselves, but you're not allowing the citizens to arm themselves to protect themselves and or their family and their property. That's when that becomes an issue whenever you're trying to disarm somebody. And also, just FYI, the Nazis disarmed people before they arrested them and put them in concentration camps. So just because someone claims to want peace, that doesn't mean that they really want peace. They could very well want to destroy you, which is what Nazi Germany did, and that's one way they took over a lot of people and they murdered a lot of people. They slaughtered them, millions. So we need to be very careful about about that way of thinking. The next thing that is celebrated on September 26th is International Daughters Day. I find that kind of odd and creepy because the United States is one of the few countries that very much fights for human rights. And, I wish we did a better job of calling out other countries on their human rights violations, especially within India and China. Korea as well, North Korea as well. But there are, and Africa. Africa has a lot of human rights violations against women. I'm not going to go into the grotesqueness of what happens to women and children and little girls, because it gives me the creeps. But it's one of those things that to me it's kind of hypocritical to have an International Daughters Day when there are many countries that they murder little girls, especially in the womb. China and India are very much at the top of the list for doing that. I've mentioned this before. In India, they have actually outlawed getting ultrasounds done for the sole purpose of finding out what the sex of the baby is, just because they've been having issues with people aborting every single girl that they get pregnant with just because they want a boy. So that's murder. So they actually had to outlaw some things in India, but who knows how much that was being enforced. But it was such a concern, and it was happening at such a high rate that it got the attention of their lawmakers. So, it's one of those things that if it's going on that heavily or at that high of a rate, then it's actually way worse than what is actually being reported. And so just be aware of that. September 26th is also World Contraception Day. I'm kind of iffy about that because so many people view abortion as a way of birth control, and abortion, is not birth control, it's murder. Whenever you're ending someone else's life like that, that's an execution basically. And the liberal left, they want to have it where you can abort a baby even almost at 9 months. Well, that's very cruel. That is sick. It's interesting to me. I don't understand why the feminists don't speak out against the killing of children because, women, we very much stand up for children and we guard and protect them. I just find it odd that the feminists are not speaking up about this because, abortions can be very dangerous to be performed on women. Like, it can actually sterilize a woman. So you have to be careful about these medical procedures. Like, it's not an exact science. It can actually be quite dangerous. And what's interesting is that there have been women here in Oklahoma that have actually bled out and died from getting abortions. There have been several different types of abortions, which we have discussed in this show previously, and I'm not going to go into that because it's very gruesome, and I don't think it needs to be repeated. But I'm just saying that, whenever you do not have sanctity of life, I think it very much devalues your society. And I think society is worth protecting because it's worth living. And it's one of those things that, if my life matters, then so does somebody else's. There's a video I saw of this abortion clinic that they were refusing to close their doors even in a state where they were outlawing abortion because of the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And I guess they're nurse practitioners. There was one that was a GP, but I don't think they were an OBGYN, which I'm thinking, okay, if someone's going to perform an abortion, it needs to be an OBGYN. It needs to be a medical doctor, like someone that's been in medical school, is up to date on the techniques, and also that is a specialist within the OBGYN field, not just random knowledge, you know what I mean? It needs to be very specialized, so I think you're putting the mother's life at risk. But they interviewed this one woman that was there. She was probably in her early to mid-20s. I think she already had a couple kids. She's not married. And she was dating this guy. He told her that he had had a vasectomy, which you can't believe guys on that when you're dating them. He was just using her for sex, and she gets pregnant. And she finds out, I guess, that he's cheating on her, and so she wanted to go ahead and abort the baby. And my thinking was, okay, what did the child do to deserve that? And also, that child is a part of her. Like, it's not just part of the guy, it's part of the girl. Like, it takes two to tango. But she was angry about her boyfriend lying, saying that he had had a vasectomy. So they did not need to use contraception. And then she finds out he's sleeping with other women, and so she basically is taking it out on the unborn child, which is also her baby. I think that's very cruel, because I don't think the child deserves that. I think that's really mean and hateful. And so it just kind of shocked me that she was having an abortion not for health reasons, not for like, hey, I've got a tubular pregnancy, this could kill me if we don't address this, which, mind you, that's very rare. She was doing it out of hate for the guy that she had been sleeping with. Well, that child doesn't deserve that hate. So just FYI, be aware of that, and please be aware that abortions, that's not the best way to control how do I describe this? Because it's kind of disturbing. That's not the best way to have contraception. I wish more women would just take like the birth control pill and things like that. Because abortions, it's very gruesome. It's a very gruesome procedure. And what I find very interesting about feminists and even women that are not feminists, some of them have this very messed up point of view about abortion. They think, it's one of those things that they use this false rationale that, well, When I don't want to have a baby, it's not a person, it's a bunch of cells. But when they do want a child, oh, it's a baby, I'm due in 5 months. Well, here's the thing, like, just because you don't want to have a baby, that doesn't mean that you can devalue it and just claim that it's a bunch of cells and that's not a person. So I just think it's very hypocritical that it's like, okay, when they do want to have a baby, oh, it's a big to-do, they have a baby shower, they're sharing their posts on Facebook and all this stuff, but when they don't want to have a baby, they don't want to basically get caught with their pants down, so to speak. Oh, it's just a bunch of cells, it's not going to hurt anything, it's not really a person yet, it's not going to feel any pain. That doesn't make sense. And I think it's a very irrational way of rationalizing getting rid of somebody. I think it's very cruel because, what some people or what a lot of people don't realize is that abortion is a form of eugenics. And eugenics is a false theology or, I guess, a type of indoctrination that basically wants to control who breeds and who doesn't. So basically, it's someone that decides, either you decide or someone else decides for you whether or not someone else lives. And that is the problem with eugenics, and that's what the Nazis used. That was their excuse, actually. Whenever these wartime criminals were caught, they said, well, we were just practicing eugenics. And then they blamed the United States. And they said, well, the United States has been practicing eugenics for over 20 or 30 years. How is what we did any different? Technically, they were right. But what they did was extremely wrong. Like, people may not realize this, but eugenics has been alive and well in the United States, I would say since the turn of the century. And eugenics is not from the United States. It was actually thought of by a guy, I can't remember his name, I'll look it up. He was a British so-called philosopher or thinker, whatever you want to call him. He believed in, I guess you could say, a type of evolution. And he didn't really view people as people. He tried to compare them to animals, so he very much dehumanized people. And he very much had this very hateful mindset, but in a medical point of view, that, well, if you just stop certain people from breeding, then we won't have ugly people, we won't have mentally retarded people, we won't have alcoholism, we won't have murderers, and we won't have people that we don't want. Well, who thinks like that? Like, who is this guy to think that he deserves to live, but others don't? And that he can have children, but others shouldn't? And so the way that he promoted his way of thinking and his philosophy type of genre, I guess you could say, was he made it seem like it was for the betterment of society and that's for human health. And so he made it seem like it was coming from a medical point of view, and that's why sometimes you have to be very careful with these elitist doctors. I'm all for modern medicine and doctors, but it's the elitist that actually do not value human life. And so they are quick to make suggestions to people that may not always be for your good, because they're looking at you from an academic point of view. They're not looking at you from a human rights point of view. They're looking at you from a scientific, academic point of view, and sometimes it can be very dehumanizing. Well, that's what this guy did, and he started his way of thinking over in England, and I can't remember this other guy's name. There's a guy here in the United States, again, around the turn of the century. He met this guy over in England and was impressed with one of his lectures or his talks, and he brought that eugenics mindset over to the United States. So when unfortunately, when the Nazis said, well, the United States have been doing this for years, they were correct. It doesn't excuse what the Nazis did because the Nazis mass murdered people. The United States has never done that. The United States did unlawfully sterilize people. which the Nazis did that as well. But it's one of those things that, I guess my point is that whenever you devalue human life, it doesn't matter if it's based on a scientific mindset or a theology or a type of indoctrination, or even if it's based on some kind of medical science. When something is unethical, it's unethical. There is no excuse to violate ethics, which is why it's very important that when doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, that they actually mean it and not try and change the words just to fit whatever they think they should be allowed to do. So that's one of the problems with abortionists, is that in order to take the Hippocratic Oath, they've been having to change the wording so that way they can actually abort children and even kill them up at 9 months, which is very grotesque. So it's one of those things that is eugenics. And just because someone has gone to medical school and they are a doctor and have a license, that doesn't mean you can trust them. That doesn't mean they're Christian. In fact, there are a lot of doctors I've met over the years. Very few of them believe in God. Very few of them are Christian. It's rare. So that very much disappoints me, because then, I would say a lot of patients are Christians. So when we go to a doctor that's not a Christian, it very much gets my attention, because they don't look at you as a whole person. They just see you as different body parts, and then they don't really promote the longevity of human life, if that makes sense. I know that sounds kind of harsh and blunt, but that's been my experience with some of these doctors. So please be aware that you don't have to see unethical doctors. For sure, me personally, I prayed about, because there were some really bad doctors that I saw, and I just said, Lord, I can't go see those people again. It was too creepy. Help me find better healthcare professionals that are not elitist, because it was becoming a problem here, even here in Oklahoma. So please be aware of that, because here's the thing. If stuff is happening here in Oklahoma, then that means it's probably already been happening on the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast, for probably, I would say, 2 years or more. Because usually what tends to happen is whenever trends start, they tend to start on the coast, which would be the liberal left on the East and West Coast. And then it slowly migrates and makes its way to the center part of the United States, aka the Bible Belt in the Deep South. And then we're like, whoa, what have these people been doing and thinking that is socially acceptable? It's bizarre. See, this is why we need to really pay attention to who we vote into office. Because whoever we vote into office often dictates our rules, laws, and regulations, as well as legislations at a state and federal level. And, these are people that pretty much help guide us into the future. That doesn't mean that we are lemmings, not by any means. But it's one of those things, we need to be careful who we put in charge of what. Because if they do not really value the human race, they should not be serving in public office of any kind. Because they don't care about the public. So just FYI, be aware of that. Also on September 26th, moving on, it is European Day of Language. I think that's really neat, because there are many languages within the European Union that are very beautiful. The romantic languages are very awesome. It's just one of those things that there are, kind of like whenever you learn Spanish, I find it's very easy to learn Italian and then to learn French, because they're very similar in their dialects and their root words. Needless to say, Chinese is very difficult to learn, but it's not a European language. I think Mandarin and Russian are two of the most difficult languages to learn. But it's good to learn new things, because it definitely keeps your brain sharp, and that's always a good thing, right? So let me go to some more housekeeping here. In terms of what is celebrated, in terms of the week of September, it's National Deaf Dog Week. That's interesting. So there are many really good people out there that they specifically adopt dogs that are not considered adoptable, which that sounds dumb to me to say that, but I think that if someone doesn't want a dog just because it's deaf, then I don't think they should be adopting an animal anyway, because those are the people that quickly put their animals down or they abandon them if their animal isn't healthy and happy all the time. They're just unrealistic about a pet and what can happen to a pet. That's just my personal opinion. It's also National Chimney Safety Week. That is always good. It is also National Fall Foliage Week. So if you have beautiful trees in your neighborhood or your state, do take a drive. Nature is very beautiful. It is also, this next one is actually the first week of October. It's Active Aging Week. I think that's really good to mention that because there's so many people that they look down on the elderly, and it's just kind of like, well, if you are a certain age, then you're old, you're decrepit, why don't you just stay in a nursing home? And it's just such a negative way to view other people. And I think an example of this is whenever COVID-19 hit, one of the things that our government did is it encouraged or mandated, I'm not really sure how it went down, but it either encouraged or mandated that nursing homes and long-term care facilities completely shut down, or not completely shut down, locked down and not let the residents out. So then their relatives had no idea what was going on because they were not allowed to visit them or see them. And also there were some people, they did not know whenever their relatives had passed away from COVID-19. And some of these facilities were not making their relatives aware of the health concerns that were going on. And some of these relatives, they didn't even know that their relative had died in one of these long-term care facilities or nursing homes, and they didn't even know where the body was to go pick up to bury them. So it's one of those things that there was a knee-jerk reaction to COVID-19, and I think our elderly population not only suffered tremendous losses at the hands of COVID-19, but also at the hands of some of these healthcare facilities that they locked it down and did not allow their residents to leave the building. I mean, if it had been me, I would have been like, I'm out of here. I'm going to stay with a relative. I'm not going to be locked down. So basically, my personal opinion is, I think those people's rights were violated when they were forced to stay indoors and they were not allowed to leave to go home to their families and stay there. It just came across as being fascist and socialist because it's someone else controlling your movement and controlling your freedoms and, in fact, taking that freedom away. So I think that is a definite concern, and I think we saw how sometimes our government misbehaves. So needless to say, it kind of shocked me. But let's go ahead and dive into the DEA. We're going to talk a little bit about the Aviation Division and the Special Response Teams. Very interesting information here. So it says the DEA Aviation Division, or Office of Aviation Operations, formerly the Aviation Section, is an airborne division based in Fort Worth Alliance Airport, Texas. Their current fleet consists of 106 aircraft and 124 DEA pilots. I think that's kind of a high amount of aircraft to have, my personal opinion, because, the more aircrafts you have, the more expensive it is to maintain those. Now, mind you, their budget is in the billions of dollars, so they're overspending, and I think it's kind of ridiculous because I don't think they need to have that many airplanes. That's just my personal opinion. It says here the DEA shares a communication system with the Department of Defense for communication with state and regional enforcement, independent of the Department of Justice and police information systems, and is coordinated by an information command center called the El Paso Intelligence Center near El Paso, Texas. Was not aware of that, but if it helps them do their job, then I guess that's a good thing with that. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about these special response teams. So the Rapid Response Teams, also known as RRT, previously known as Foreign Deployed Advisory and Support Teams, were decommissioned by DEA Acting Administrator Chuck Rosenberg in March 2017. A need for domestic high-risk service teams led to the hybrid creation of specialized tactical units residing within various geographical regions throughout the United States. So they're basically trying to recategorize these jobs, and they're probably trying to make things easier for them so that way they can do their job and do it well, and to make it more specialized would be my guess, and I think that's a good thing to do. It says DEA officially created and standardized its Special Response Team program in 2016. The SRT was designed as a stopgap between tactical operations conducted by field agents and those necessitating specialized tactics as a result of elevated risk. SRT operations are highly trained in various weapon systems and entry tactics and maneuvers. Because of the nature of the DEA mission, SRT training protocols and activation requirements are highly sensitive and not available to the public. I can see why. Some of the SRT missions consist of high-risk arrests, vehicle assaults, air assault, infiltration, specialized surveillance, custody of high-profile individuals, dignitary and witness protection, tactical surveillance and interdiction, advanced breaching, tactical training to other police units, and urban and rural fugitive searches. I think that's really good, especially on fugitive searches, because I know it's one of those things that we need to be careful about who we are allowing into the United States, especially with our southern border, because at this point in time, we do have a problem with people trespassing into the United States illegally. And some of these people are not good people. We do have issues with illegal and illicit drugs being brought into the United States, being bought and sold. So we do need to be aware of those things as well. I'm not saying freak out because it never pays to freak out, but just be aware and handle it appropriately is what I'm trying to say. It says here, covertly located throughout the nation, DEA SRT teams are available to respond to practically any geographical area with little to no preparation or notification. So that tells me they are highly trained and they're really good at what they do. The SRT team has been involved in several high-profile operations in recent years. However, DEA involvement is often not publicized due to operational and intelligence considerations. I completely understand. They need privacy. Considered one of the most covert outfits in federal law enforcement, very little is known about SRT capabilities and its operator selection process. I understand why. In the past, DEA had other tactical teams like the high-risk entry apprehension teams in some field divisions and Operation Snowcap teams. The teams administered by the Mobile Enforcement Section, the Mobile Enforcement Teams, and regional enforcement teams were mobile investigative units intended to deploy resources to state and local agencies or DEA field divisions in need of assistance with a particular investigation or trafficking group. These programs ended in the early 2000s. In terms of special operations divisions, moving on here, it says the DEA Special Operations Division, also known as SOD, is a division within the DEA which forwards information from wiretaps, intercepts, and databases from various sources to federal agents and local law enforcement officials. The SOD came under scrutiny following the 2013 mass surveillance disclosures. Here's the thing. There are some things that they have to investigate, but they need to do it legally. Whenever they are doing mass surveillance, the biggest issue I have is sometimes they are targeting just regular everyday Americans and we're just living our lives. So they're not going after the people that are actually committing crimes or people that are actually suspicious. So also there was an issue with how they are storing data and how they are acquiring data. So it's one of those things that I kind of find it hypocritical with some of these agencies because it's like whenever a company in the private sector has a data breach, oh, it's bad, it's in the news, all this stuff. But whenever a federal or state agency goes after people's information unlawfully, it's not considered a data breach, which it is a data breach. It's not only that, but it's also an overreach of their legislative, power or their role or protocol, I guess I would say. So it's one of those things that we have to be careful what agencies we give power to and exactly what are those powers. It kind of reminds me of when President Obama was president and he had all these different czars that we had no idea. We didn't really know who they were, what they did, but they were overpaid people and there was just kind of this veil of secrecy. And then the more we found out about these czars, which mind you, some of those roles unfortunately were created under President Bush post 9/11, which again was a knee-jerk reaction. because it's one of those things that we shouldn't have czars. We're not Russia, and even Russia doesn't have czars anymore. So I think it's one of those things that, we have to be careful about what new roles are we creating and what is the purpose of those roles, and make sure that it is within the realms of democracy and doing things for the right reasons, which I don't think President Obama was doing those things for the right reason. I think it was very concerning for sure. But we'll talk about one more section here and then close out for this episode. We're going to close out with domestic cannabis eradication and suppression program. And this is a little bit outdated because medical marijuana has been made legal in quite a few states within the United States, at least at a state level, but not necessarily at a federal level, which I think is a big issue because it's one of those things that, these people that have these marijuana facilities or these businesses, what they're doing is legal at a state level, but because it's not legal at a federal level, they've been having a hard time finding a bank to house their money and to be able to conduct business transactions. So it has created a lot of problems in terms of FDIC and the banking industry and things like that, because these people, they do own a business and they have every right to have a bank account at a bank because they need to have access to their money, and also they need to be able to pay their taxes, whether state, federal, or compliance or licensing and things like that. But it's one of those things that sometimes the federal government is a little behind the times, which I think this will prove that point. But it says the Domestic Cannabis Eradication Suppression Program began funding eradication programs in Hawaii and California in 1979. Good luck with that. The program rapidly expanded to include programs in 25 states in 1982. Again, this is ramping up to the war on drugs, which I completely disagree with. It says by 1985, all 50 states were participating in this program. In 2015, the program was responsible for the eradication of a little over 3.9 million cultivated outdoor cannabis plants and a little over 325,000 indoor plants for a total of, 4,257,220 marijuana plants. In addition, this program accounted for 6,278 arrests, which I do not agree with, and a seizure in excess of $29.7 million of cultivator assets. One thing that our federal government loves to do is it loves to confiscate other people's money. And it just makes me wonder, what do they do with these monies? Well, sometimes, unfortunately, what they do is they buy stuff with it. We've had problems with that here in the state of Oklahoma in regards to the sheriff's department. Not all of them are bad, but when they're bad, they're pretty bad. Unfortunately, we have some sheriff's departments here in Oklahoma that, let's say you're driving down the highway and you happen to have a lot of money on you, and it's for legitimate reasons. Let's say you're going to go buy a Sea-Doo or a boat or something and you're paying with cash. Well, if you happen to get pulled over by a sheriff or a deputy or something, they give themselves permission to take all your money because they think it's suspicious that you're carrying so much money, even though you're going to go purchase something like you are conducting business. It is like pulling teeth to get your money back. And so what ends up happening is the sheriff's department, they end up buying all this weaponry. They basically are militarizing their department, which are police departments, whether they are police departments or sheriff's departments. They are not supposed to be militarized. Only our military should have access to that type of information and weapons. But unfortunately, they just kind of use it as an excuse to basically go to Toys R Us and spend whatever they want on aisle 7 is the analogy that I use commonly on this show. And it's been a problem in the United States. In Oklahoma, I should say. And so, that's one of those examples of corruption that needs to stop. And we've had some issues with that here in Oklahoma. So you just have to be careful about things like that. So if you are going to be conducting business and you're dealing with thousands of dollars, you need to do a cashier's check and go ahead and have the bank fill it out, who it's going to be paid to, and just have all the legal documents on you that you have them on you at the time whenever you get pulled over, even if it's for a simple traffic violation. And here's the thing. Do not encourage the police to go through your belongings or your vehicle. they need to have a warrant. They need to have some kind of legal precedence in order to go through anything that is your private property. Another issue that has been going on is they have been confiscating people's cars as well, impounding them. So it's been one of those things that sometimes it's very difficult to get your car out of the clink, but yet they want people's property. So that's why I get concerned whenever you have a government agency that seizes $29.7 million of someone else's assets. So it's like, well, what is the government doing with that money? Because it doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to the people who it belongs to. So that's one of those things that socialists and fascists and communists, I would say all three of them, they love to seize other people's assets, whether it's their monies, their properties, whatever the case may be. That is a very serious sign of dysfunction within your country whenever you have agencies that are confiscating funds like this, because it doesn't belong to the government. The only thing that belongs to the government is tax dollars in terms of financial assets and things of that nature. Which also another thing, considering that not all states are, how do I describe this? Considering that the federal government does not want to legalize medical marijuana, it makes it very difficult for people to pay their federal taxes legally, because they're trying to pay their taxes on something that is legal at a state level, but it's not legal at a federal level. That creates a big issue. So then it's kind of like the war on drugs continues, and it's like, what year are we in? Like, we need to grow up here, and be adults about this. But it goes on to say in 2014, the DEA spent $73,000 to eradicate marijuana plants in Utah. I think that's a waste of time. Though they did not find a single marijuana plant, I'm not surprised. Federal documents obtained by journalist Drew Atkins detail the DEA's continuing efforts to spend upwards of $14 million per year to completely eradicate marijuana within the United States, despite the government funding allocation reports showing that the marijuana eradication program often leads to the discovery of no marijuana plants. This prompted 12 members of Congress to push for the elimination of the program and use the money instead to fund domestic violence prevention and deficit reduction programs. I actually agree with Congress on this, because I think it's ridiculous to waste money like this and to go after a stupid plant. I think we have way more important things to deal with than things of that nature. But needless to say, sometimes our government is not the wisest. They're not always the brightest. I can see why they do get concerned with marijuana and things of that nature, but I do think that at some point you have to recognize that not everybody that smokes marijuana is an addict or a druggie or a thug or things of that nature, because there is recreational use. There's a difference. There's a difference between being a druggie, using it for recreational use, or using it for medical purposes. I saw an article online several years ago, and a YouTube video as well, about a girl that, she has, I guess, either epilepsy or some type of seizures that, how to describe this? The medicines that she was prescribed were no longer working to control the seizures or the epilepsy, whatever the case may be. And these seizures and whatnot were so violent, they were starting to damage her brain. And so her parents looked into it, and they realized that they could try and use medical marijuana to help with this. And so that's what they did. They went ahead and tried to get medical marijuana for their daughter. And this was several years ago, when medical marijuana was not really being considered an acceptable form of medicine to treat hardly anything, which is very unfortunate. And so they actually ended up moving to where the medical marijuana that their daughter needed, they moved there so that she could get access to it and for it to be legal for their daughter. And so these parents were demonized for doing that. And I just think it's really sad that whenever a child needs medical treatment And because there's such a stigma attached with the marijuana plant, that our government is willing to let a child suffer, just for the sake of war on drugs and just having a very false impression of things that take place. I think it's really weird because it doesn't make sense to me. Because it's one of those things that, I think every state has a foster care system. I mean, I'm guessing they do because Oklahoma does. But it's one of those things that sometimes it's almost like the foster care system, they try and promote that they care about children, but sometimes they don't always care. It's like they're not always really trying to look out for the kids. They just want the taxpayers' money, and they don't want to relinquish control. And sometimes these foster kids, there are people that want to adopt foster children, but unfortunately the adoption process has been made so difficult, so cumbersome, and so expensive that it's made it very difficult for people to adopt foster kids. But yet, the foster care system, at a state level will complain that, oh, nobody wants these kids. And it's like, well, actually, people do want those kids. They very much do, and they want to provide a home for them. And it's one of those things that sometimes state and federal agencies get in the way of proper medical care, even for children, because they're so hung up on bureaucracy and rules, laws, and just keeping the status quo and trying to control other people's lives, that they will actually value the law or the agency rules more than a person's life. And that's where it becomes an issue because, the whole purpose of having rules, laws, and regulations is to protect and preserve human life. It is not to destroy it or to hinder it. So it's very important, I think, for us to wake up to the fact that sometimes, yes, we do have federal agencies that are very important to the United States, but sometimes they have an overreach and sometimes they're just too gung-ho on arresting people, harassing people. And when I say people, I mean citizens of the United States. And it's just really concerning. Like sometimes these agencies, they remind me of TSA agents who just bully people at airports. And it's just like, it's not appropriate. Like, we pay their salaries, so it's almost like we're paying them to be bullies. And it's not right, because technically we are their boss because we pay their paychecks. Now, that doesn't mean that we tell them off or be rude, not by any means, because it never hurts to be, respectful and genuine and kind. But here's the thing, we need to be careful who we put in charge of what. And also, what is their mindset? Like, how do they view these things? How do they view the public? Because from what I've seen, especially from congressional hearings and Senate hearings, the liberal left, they view the general public as a very stupid people. And I think that is so insulting to the United States. It's ridiculous. Because it comes across as, oh, only the elitists know what to do. Well, obviously that is not true, because right now we have elitists that have been elected into the presidency, into senators, into the Congress, and things of that nature, all these elected positions. But yet we have horrible inflation. We have limited gasoline being produced or oil being drilled within the United States. Our inflation rate is ridiculous. Our currency is suffering. I mean, it's not bad. It's not horrible, but it could be better. And it's just, a lot of these things are a result of who is in office. And so those things that, yes, we respect the office. We always respect the office. What I'm talking about is you need to be careful who you elect into that office, so that way it does not affect the currency and the future of your country. But see, here's the thing. Like, one of the things, and I'll close with this, one of the things that really punished Nazi Germany was when their currency, among other things, their currency was pretty much worth nothing, especially after World War I and World War II. And so their currency, it was virtually worth nothing, that they were actually using their paper money as a way to keep their houses warm. Like, they were throwing their money into their furnaces to cook food and to provide heat in their homes. See, here's the thing. We don't want to get to that point. That's why it's very important to elect people that understand democracy, freedom, liberty, fair trade, capitalism, and having a normal market, which means you have competition. If you don't have competition, then that's where you have inflation. One of the ways that we have inflation in the United States right now is our gas prices and our health care. Whenever you have the government trying to be in charge of your fuel, well, basically anything, but especially your fuel and your health care, there is going to be inflation. Perfect examples of this are the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, I would say Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, Greece. Oh, they're horribly bankrupt. Greece has been horribly run for years. It's just, they have a very bizarre mindset, very extreme, laid back European mindset. It's like, they work, a lot of them work part-time hours, but they expect to get paid full-time pay. Which, that's greed. That's stealing from your employer. So, but yet they don't call it that, but that's basically what it is. So it's one of those things that it matters who you have in these elected positions, whether it's the presidency, your senators, your congressmen, House of Representatives, things of that nature, and things at a federal and state level, as well as your, I was going to say general counsel, but that's not the right word, your city council, things of that nature. You need to be very much aware of that. And what's interesting is that I grew up in a small town. It was small when I was younger, but our city council, we don't get to vote for them. They elect each other. So it's one of those things that it's very corrupt in that. And what I mean by they vote for each other is that in terms of becoming mayor, I need to reword that because I don't want to speak out of turn. We can vote for who represents our area, our street, our region, or whatever within our town or whatever. But in terms of mayor, we never get to vote, or excuse me, I don't live there anymore, but we never got to vote for who the mayor would be. The city council members would just kind of rotate who they vote for. They would just elect each other. So it was almost run like a frat house, where it's kind of like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And so whenever you have a city council that operates like that, it's very difficult to get good things done, and it's very hard to address corruption and to stop corruption because, yes, we the people, we get to vote for our council member, but if we don't get to elect our mayor, I find that kind of odd. And, being that, I word it this way, sometimes small towns have small minds. So when I think about the town I was raised in and just the mindset of people, especially when I was a kid, I'm not surprised that they have the audacity, or they had the audacity, I think that's changed over time, that they had the audacity that, we're just going to decide, who should be mayor for all the townspeople here. We, the city council, you elected us into office, and so we will decide for you who will be mayor. You know what that's like? That's like you electing, you vote for a senator, and instead of the American people voting for a president, only the senators get to decide who becomes president of the United States. That's what that is like. That is limiting liberty and freedom. Thank goodness we don't have that, right? But that is what has been happening for years on some of these city councils within these, smaller towns have the hiccups. And it's very important that those things not happen anymore. But here's the thing, if people are not aware of voting laws, if they're not registered to vote, and again, I don't care how you register to vote, I just hope and pray that you vote for someone that you know what they stand for and that you believe in that candidate, and it's not based on a bizarre political agenda, and that it's actually for the health and safety of the United States, and it's actually for our democracy and our freedom. So please be aware of that. Because here's the thing, if you don't get out and vote, basically you're just handing the future of your country into the hands of elitists and people that don't really care about you, much less love you. So please be aware of that. But, people need to be aware of their voting rights. They need to be registered to vote. If you are a citizen of the United States, let me make that very clear, because if you're not a citizen, nothing against you, but if you're not a citizen, you can't vote. And, that's nothing new. I mean, just take any other country on the face of this earth, don't get huffy and puffy. It's the law, So please be aware of the voting laws, the voting rules. Please have an ID, because you should have an ID in order to vote. And you need to be aware of who is running for what. So it's not just for the President of the United States. Also, within your state, sometimes you get to elect different judges. You elect, senators, representatives, congressmen, congresswomen. There's some places that you elect judges, attorneys. What's the other thing? Your superintendent. There's all these different offices. So, please be aware of those things, because even if it's just at a local level, your vote matters. Because typically what happens at a local level, if it goes unchecked, it proceeds to advance to a state level. If it goes unchecked at that point, then it goes to a federal level. And that's how some of these bizarre agendas just get a stranglehold on the United States. And it just ruins a lot of things. I think that's how critical race theory really got going, so to speak. I think that's how it became kind of mainstream, even though parents are still very irritated about it, and I don't blame them. But it's one of those things. If people are not paying attention, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, I'm just saying that if people are not paying attention to something locally, how are they going to know what's happening at a national level, at a state level, at an international level? It's very important, because, the United States, we are on multiple stages, so to speak. We have a national stage within our country, but then we are on an international stage. And that is a great responsibility for us as a nation, because we are a world superpower. So when you are a world superpower, you have to be mindful of all these different avenues of transitions and power struggles and things of that nature, and be aware of these different policies, especially ones that happen within your own country, your own state, your own city, your own town. Because, what people may not realize is that a lot of these corrupt countries, they look to the United States for the example and for the solution to their problem. It's not always about money, but sometimes it is. But it's one of those things that if we don't really understand our democracy, and if we don't believe in our Constitution of the United States, how can we be an example to the entire world of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate? You know what I mean? That's why we always need to set the standard high, not lower it, just because some people don't want to have a better standard in their life. Always have a high standard. Raise the bar. Raise the bar. Because that is what eliminates the majority of corruption, the majority of problems, the majority of issues. Because if you continue to I word it this way, if you settle for less than God's best, you are always going to have issues. Always. You're always going to be extremely frustrated. You're probably not really going to know what's going on. And it's going to feel like it's hopeless. Why? Because you have settled for something that God doesn't want you to have. God doesn't want us to be miserable. He doesn't want us to be poor. He doesn't want us to be sickly. He doesn't want our country to be socialist, fascist, or communist. Because all three of those types of government go against God's law, and we are one nation under God. We are not one nation under Stalin. We are not one nation under Lenin. We are not one nation under Marxism. You know what I mean? We are one nation under God. See, that's very important that we be reminded of that, because if you make government your God, you've basically just sold out your freedom for the rest of your life, and possibly for future generations. Because whatever freedoms you give up and whatever freedoms you sacrifice for someone that doesn't love you or respect you, it can take hundreds of years to undo the damage of not caring about your future or the future of your children or your future generations. That's why this stuff is important, and that's why we go over these different agencies, whether they are state or federal. Right now we're going over different federal agencies because these are very important. State agencies, they're just as important, but state agencies tend to affect us more at a state and local level. Federal agencies, these affect everybody equally. Whereas state agencies, like for example, I live in Oklahoma, so whatever a state agency in Texas does, 99.9% of the time, it's not going to affect me here in Oklahoma. It just isn't. But federal agencies, this affects our entire country. It affects all of our states and our territories and things of that nature. So that's why these things are so important. That's another reason why we take a look at the different labor unions within the United States, because sometimes the federal government plays favorites with labor unions, and that's not appropriate because the federal government belongs to the people, which that means it belongs to everybody that is a citizen within the United States of America. So there is no rhyme or reason to have favoritism because, the United States was founded to be the opposite of favoritism, because I think people forget that our founding fathers, they came over here to America, which we were not America at that time. We were originally the 13 colonies, and we were under the rule of Great Britain. And they were sick and tired of favoritism. They were having to deal with the rules and regulations of the gentry. They were having to deal with the monarchy. They were having to deal with bureaucracies at a much more intense level, I would say. And, that's why if you read the Constitution of the United States and you read some of the writings of some of our founding fathers, there's a reason why they say that men are created equal. But under pretty much any other form of government, men are not equal. So if you're not equal, you have a lot of dysfunction within your society. And it typically stems from your laws that are being implemented by the people that are in charge and have most, if not all, the power. The great thing, or one of the great things about the United States, and there are many things that are great about the United States, but one of the great things about the United States is that just because we elect people into office, that doesn't mean they have all the power. The power is still with the people. We just elect people to represent us, which is you and me, the citizens of the United States. So that's one reason why you need to not elect elitists into leadership roles, because they will never view you as an equal. They will never treat you with dignity and respect. They will probably lie to your face and make it seem like they care about you and certain, hashtag movements and certain things on their agenda. But when it comes down to it, elitists only care about themselves. They are typically socialist or fascist. Some are communist, but that's rare. Most of them are socialist, and it is about greed. They hate rich people, but they just want their money. So obviously they have a love-hate relationship with wealthy individuals. So it's one of those things that when you have dysfunction, you cannot call dysfunction normal and expect things to function normal, if that makes sense. Like on this show, we call a spade a spade. So that's why I mention this stuff. It's very important that we understand, and I'm in the same boat as anybody else, because a lot of this stuff, like I've heard of these different federal agencies over the years, but a lot of them, I don't know the details, like what I'm telling you guys on this show. Like I'm having to research this stuff and I'm learning just as much as you guys are. But it's very much an eye-opening experience because you realize, okay, there's some things we do need, there's some things we don't need. But regardless of what we do need or what we don't need, we always need to elect good people into office. Because if you do not elect good people into office, there is a tremendous risk for having tyranny taking place within the different offices of the United States. And I'm not just talking about the presidency. Most of what I'm talking about is within these federal agencies. Because it's, as I've said in times past, these federal agencies, they get very chippy with each other. Like they don't even like each other, but yet they will circle the bandwagons around each other just to, they kind of use it almost like a weapon as, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. But when it comes down to it, these agencies, they just want the taxpayers' money. So it is, per se about greed. I do think there are some things they do that are good, but I don't think what they do when it's good, I don't think it should cost over $2 billion a year. And that's just for one agency. I find that to be ridiculous. I think it's very hypocritical for the federal government to spend billions of dollars within a single agency, but yet look how much people are not getting in their Social Security. People are being denied access to medicine. Our veterans are not getting the proper health care that they need at the VA. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it's like, these federal agencies, they want the money, but they don't want anybody else to have the money. So, that comes down to basically a misappropriation of funds. But, typically, in the private sector, whenever there's a misappropriation of funds, it's typically a state or federal offense, meaning it's possibly criminal, depending on what happened. But whenever the federal government or some of these agencies have that issue, it's not always seen as a federal offense. It's not always seen as criminal because there are some things that it's just kind of the status quo. So that's why I mentioned that, it's very important that people be registered to vote, that you be a citizen of the United States, that you have a ID, like a state ID, and that you vote for what you believe in. And also make sure that what you believe in promotes the integrity of the United States. Socialism, fascism, and communism does not promote the integrity of the United States. If anything, it destroys it. Because that is the goal of liberalism, socialism, fascism, and communism. It destroys anything that it hates and despises. And the things that it hates or despises are freedom, liberty, democracy, capitalism. So please be aware of those things and understand that, yes, we do need federal agencies, but they need to be run by good people that understand that the United States is a democracy. It's not a theocracy. It's not a monarchy. It's not the People's Republic of China, which that's kind of hypocritical that they even say republic because it's not a republic, not by any means, because they have slave labor over there. But we just need to wake up as a country to these things that take place and kind of the hidden loopholes where we never think to look. Like people don't ever think to look in the DEA. Like they don't, most people don't know what the Drug Enforcement Administration is. And if someone does know it, if they do know what it is, it's because they've had some type of interaction, either at a state or federal level or something, or maybe they read something in the paper, you know what I mean? Like, well, technically people don't do newspapers anymore, but then maybe they read something online. But it's one of those things that, it's as I say, I type up in my podcast on the episodes, knowledge is power. But here's the thing, if you do not have knowledge of these things, more than likely you're going to be powerless to do what's right, especially in the voting booth, if that makes sense. So that's why these things are very important. Because, I think it's reasonable to say that, I think we've all gone through hardships in our life at one point or another, which is unfortunate, but, that's human life, but, it's one of those things that sometimes we can look back at a situation and think, if I had known X, Y, Z, I probably would have done things differently. I probably would have thought differently. I probably could have avoided this. What's that phrase? Hindsight is 20/20 or something. Well, it's kind of the same thing with knowledge is power. See, because if you don't know what's going on, you technically are powerless to change your situation. It doesn't mean you can't try. But if you don't know what's going on, you are hindering the integrity of your vote. Because what saddens me a lot whenever we have elections is whenever people, you'll have newscasters that will interview people that have just voted or something, and they'll ask them, okay, who did you vote for? Why did you vote for them? And sometimes they vote for people they don't even know who they are. They don't know what the person stands for. They don't know their track record. And it's just kind of like the news reporter asks them, well, why did you vote for them? And they can't really give a good answer. It's just really weird. Or some of their answers are just bizarre. Like, that's why you voted for them? I mean, they have every right to vote for whoever they want, but it's just kind of like, I thought people cared more about how their vote counts, I guess is my point on that. But anyway, I'm going over a little over an hour, but I will go ahead and end this podcast. But as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.